Okay. My name is Harry Johnson. I went to Angola September the 1st, October 1st.
And just remember, just look at me.
Okay,
It's like
October,
yeah, just
okay.
me and you have a
October
conversation.
1st, 1967, for armed robbery and murder of a police officer. I came home December the 1st, 2022, 55 years later. You understand? And I met, I've experienced a lot of things, and, in Angola, you know what I'm saying? Things that guys didn't, because I went in the 60s, and it was a completely different place. And like the previous fella told you, Jerome told you, when Warden Kane came, he changed a lot of things. Because Warden Maggio changed. Before that, it really was the bloodiest penitentiary in the country. You know, I've slept next to guys that was killed. I'm sitting there. I talked to him that night, and the next morning I wake up to talk to him. He got his head covered up. I said, "Oh, what's happening?" And I look, and they go to count, and he raised the cover off him, and his head knocked off. His head knocked off. So it was a different time. You had different inmates. You had different class inmates. They had different value systems. You understand? They had different value systems. We as as young black prisoners, you know, we didn't have the respect that we had for one another that the younger generations came up and had. We actually did a lot of things that was detrimental to our own brothers. I'll give you an example. If you was from a place like New Orleans, Shreveport, or Baton Rouge, you got a free pass. Things was easy. But it was a place from Alexandria, Monroe, Ville Platte, places where the guys weren't as rowdy, weren't as violent. You had a hard, difficult time. You had a hard, difficult time. I was in CCR, which was up at that row at the time, and I never forget, this was Easter Sunday morning, 1973, and a guy was on the tier named August Kelly, and he was participating in homosexuality. And these guys were conscious guys, and they didn't allow that. And they opened all the cells, and everybody on the tier stabbed him. Everybody on the tier stabbed him, killed him, you know. And with Fox, he was a part of it. He was a part of it. They charged him with Fox, uh, King, Robert King, part of it. These were guys that were the Angola Three. I don't know if you ever heard of them, but Angola Three, these were guys that were conscious. And George Jackson, you know. But let me see what maybe give you an idea if I can. Through me being a little older than everybody else, you understand. I remember, Brown versus Kansas. That's the case that integrated schools. I remember the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, a guy named Earl Warren. He had been the former governor of California. He was a Republican. And at the time, President Eisenhower, was the president of the United States. And Eisenhower thought that this guy was going to be a real conservative guy. But once he put him in office and nominated him for Chief Justice of the United States, that's when he came up with cases like Miranda, Powell, the Supreme Court outlawed the death penalty. you know. But these were the things that came about. But Eisenhower, he didn't know, he didn't know, he didn't understand. So we got the backlash from that. The backlash is what I suffered. The former guy just told you suffered. Most guys, they're still suffering from it. They're still suffering. In fact, Trump is a product of the backlash. You know what I'm saying? Because they would say, oh, it's too much, they weren't following the Constitution. They gutted the Fourth Amendment, illegal searches and seizures. They gutted that, took that away from you. You know what I'm saying? You would go to trial, and I remember when I told you October the 1st, 1967, I woke up in Central Lockup, and I was busted for armed robbery and murder of a police officer. Never shot a gun in my life at that particular time. Never shot a gun in my life at that particular time. But I remember you used to have guys that come to Angola, and I had a stepfather. He came to Angola 3 times for murder. And each time, they let him cop out for 10 years. And each time he made parole after doing 3 years. So he did, he did kill, his name was Louis Brown, called him Piccolo, But in 1970, I'm going 1970 to give you a condensed version, Edward Edwards became governor of the state. And if you know anything about Edward Edwards, he made money. He made money. And if I'm not mistaken, he went to the penitentiary for the riverboat gambling thing, selling those riverboats. So if you go right now and you look at every major prison in this state besides Angola and DeQuincy was built under Edwards administration. You understand? So as I'm on death row, 1972, June 29th, the Supreme Court outlawed the death penalty. So I came back and I was resentenced. I received a life sentence. But now they had guys that had been in Angola, and they would have a life sentence. And at one time, the assistant warden and the lieutenant governor, they could grant you a pardon after 10 years and 6 months. It would stop that. That was the beginning. That was the beginning of having these extended sentences, these periods. And if you go all the way to 72, 73, and you see as he was governor, he introduced him, Charles Buddy Roman's father, they introduced the life sentences without pardon, parole, or suspension of sentence. They were taking and giving guys who had got busted with maybe 1 bag of heroin, life sentence without suspension of pardon, parole. But the purpose of that was for Edwards to make money. He didn't make money. So they got to him about 1980, and they called him selling pardons. But he went to trial, and a Baton Rouge representative that he did business with didn't tell on him. Joe Delpit took the rap, and Edwards got away. You know what I'm saying? But that was the beginning of the extended sentencing in this state. Like I told you, at the time when the Supreme Court outlawed the death penalty, and I was placed in Angola in population, they had a standard, 10 years and 6 months. You have a life sentence, that's the most you would do, 10 years and 6 months. But Edwards and Miss Elaine Hunt, who was Hunt named after, they got together and they changed that law. So this is not, let me say, so as I said, I got busted October 1st, 1967. I got found guilty March 18th, 1968. So when my time came up, I had got a rap sheet. And I had done 10 years and 6 months on April the 8th, April the 6th, 1978. I was supposed to go home. I was supposed to go home. But like I told you, they did away. They gutted the 10-6 law. You understand? Then they passed first degree murder, which didn't apply to me because before I was sentenced over under the old law. Since I did, so I had a police murder. Edwards wouldn't mess with police murders. He wouldn't take the money for police murders. He wouldn't take the money for police murders, you know what I'm saying? But, so I wind up doing 55 years. I knew other guys, Padilla, Raymond, Harris. He did something like 35 years. Guys like Popsy, Edward Johnson. These are guys that are from New Orleans that I knew that did 40 years. I knew Sammy Robinson. He came up there in 1953. He died after doing 68 years. He never went home. But all of this was a product of Edward Edwards and the criminal justice system. Now the irony of this is the irony of this here. Now we all know about District Attorney Harry Connick, law and order. You know what I'm saying? Destroyed many lives. But this is how Harry Connick, this is a true story, this is how Harry Connick became District Attorney of New Orleans. 1965, Harry Connick was a legal aid lawyer. He was a legal aid lawyer. And at the time, we had we didn't understand anything about the criminal justice system. We didn't know about writ of habeas corpus, post-conviction relief applications, you know what I'm saying? So they had guys that were drug addicts, and they'd get caught with a syringe, they get caught with a syringe, and they automatically get 2 years, 10 years in the penitentiary. You know what I'm saying? For nothing. You know what I'm saying? It's just a syringe, no drug residue, anything in it. But Connick came along and he went to file a motion to suppress. You understand? Saying this was illegal actions, it was unconstitutional. You understand? So we all remember Connick. 1972, he come back from California. And all the older convicts, we remember him. We knew he said, what a good legal aid lawyer he was, So, he said he's going to run for DA. So everybody said, oh, man, we're going to get Connick. Man, Connick, he's really square. He's really straight guy. When he came in, his true colors showed. He instituted multiple offenders. The multiple offender statute. You understand? If you had a previous felony and you came out and you hadn't stayed out 5 years without being arrested or anything, and you got busted again, you understand? You was charged and you given enhanced sentences. It may be a life sentence. It may be a sentence for armed robbery without parole, suspension of sentence, and this was backlash, like I said, from Earl Warren Court. So we got Rehnquist, we got Reagan, we got Edwards. Edwards, the guys always tell me about Edwards. Edwards this. I say, oh man, Edwards was a piece of crap. You know what I'm saying? Because he's the one that instituted these harsh sentencing laws, because he knew that he was going to be able to get money. Parents, mothers, come up with $5,000, $10,000. You know what I'm saying? He didn't care. You know what I'm saying? And you get out. But years passed. I'm still in Angola. So I'm doing things. I met Tiger, other fellas. So I said, let me work on my case. So I came up with something called ex post facto. Now remember when I told you, at the time when I got busted, you understand, a life sentence in Angola was 10 years and 6 months. You understand? So I said I started working on my case about 2010. It took me 12 years to get out. But I finally wound up and I filed a writ ex post facto. You understand? Saying that at this particular time, I wasn't the longest serving, but I was within the top 10 longest serving Angola lifers. You understand? Under a sentence that was constitutionally illegal for me because at the time that I got caught for the charge, the sentence I only could have been sentenced to 10 years and 6 months. So I came home in, 2022 after 55 years, and that's my story.
So tell me, what was it? Tell me about New Orleans in the 60s.
Okay, New Orleans in the 60s was a real great city. It was a great city, even though we had to ride on the back of the bus. You understand? What that is? The project is across the street from the Desire. That's where Florida project. That's where Ruby Bates went, and he was talking. I remember, when she's going to school, and he was talking 2468. We don't want to integrate. You know what I'm saying? But guys were more conscious because this was the time when we was going through Dr. King, Medgar Evers, Robert A.Z. Young, Bugaloos, Deacons for Defense. You know what I'm saying? But the area we in now, we was right around the Lafitte Project. You understand? This was a neighborhood. The Lafitte Project was a neighborhood. And you had guys like Pumpkin, Edward Johnson, Louis Mix, Red Top, Robert Harrison, Booby Montana was there. It was great Tootie Montana, Indian suits, and they had a sense of camaraderie between the blacks.
I was about to ask you that because, like I said, it was different times. So what did it mean? Like, because that was it was segregation wasn't still there, but it was.
Yeah, it was. It was. It was. In fact, not only was segregation still there, and one of the things that they did us, I'm talking about blacks, to put us in these projects, and then they sent our kids to platoon school. I mean, half a day, half a day school. That's all the black kids were going. Half a day school. You go to school from 8 to 11 in the morning. You come at 12. You stay 12 to 2:30, 3 o'clock. You know what I'm saying? And that's substandard education. That was substandard education, and we was left behind. But we struggled. In some of the very first sit-ins was at Woolworth right there on Canal Street. With students would sit in to integrate the school lunch counter. I mean, not the school lunch counter, the restaurant counter. You know what I'm saying? You couldn't sit buy a hamburger. You know what I'm saying? We sat on the bus. We would go on the bus. We had to sit behind the seat, sit behind the colored. You know, we sat there. You know, so it was real racist. We had Chip Morrison, Skiro, Jim Garrison. He was a district attorney. He became a district attorney. You know, so but the blacks, we had a sense of camaraderie. You know, I'll tell you this. I've never seen a murdered body. I've never seen a murdered body. I've seen a murdered body after it was in the morgue, but I mean, I've never seen a murdered body on the street. I've never seen, you know, I'm pretty certain, now I'm 70 years old, I'm pretty certain that they don't have too many 10, 12-year-old children, black kids right now that could see that they've never seen a murdered body that was on the street, that a guy was, you know, murdered, you know, sat on the street. But like I said, we had teachers, and they strove to instill in us principles, respect, and the church played a big and a significant role. And a big and significant role, you know what I'm saying? You know, youngsters, they were more respectful of older guys, you know what I'm saying? I know, like, when I first went to Angola, I knew a lot of dudes, and I had heard about them. But these guys tried to, in a sense, to instill within you a sense of respect for our culture. You know, we had to grade Professor Longhair, Fats Domino. You know, and New Orleans was, it was a rich city during the '60s. You know, but it seems to have changed now. It has changed now.
Yeah, so tell me about that. How, like, you went in one way, and then when you came out, I mean, talk to me about the overall change and how it looked, and then I want you to tell me about technology, because they didn't have near.
No, they didn't have any. They didn't have any. Look, you know what I'm saying? I remember this here. All we had was landline phones. Okay, and Marbell, which now that was the best thing that I can remember. One of the best things the Supreme Court did when they ruled Marbell a trust, and you know. And was one time all the phones were Bell. You were aware of that? Huh? Yeah, all the phones were Bell, all over the country. You know, in Michigan, you had Michigan Bell. Down here, we had Ma Bell. You know, you paid your phone bill every month, and you had to pay it. If you didn't pay your phone bill for the previous month, you know, when you were supposed to, your phone was taken away from you, you know. But when I went to Angola, and quite naturally, there had people smuggling phones in. And I saw the phone, I said, man, what is this? And I still can't really operate the doggone thing, you know, but technology, you know, I can remember the first man going to the moon, you know, so it was like.
So, I'm ignorant to the year of when did that happen? Were you incarcerated when that happened?
Well, yes, 1969.
They played it on TV, or?
Yeah, they played it on TV. They let us show, you know, I remember when Mark X's killing police officers, killing police officers, you know. But like I said, you know, in fact, you know, if you recall, a few weeks ago in May, they had somebody, 11 guys escaped out of the parish. Well, if you go look at the record, and you go to December 21st, 1968, 28 inmates escaped out of the parish prison. 28 inmates escaped out of the parish prison. You didn't know that, huh? Yeah, look it up. December 21st, 1968, 28 inmates escaped out of the parish prison. But at that time, Lewis Hyde, he was the criminal sheriff, and his dad he was the criminal sheriff, and his brother was the fire chief. And the Geruso boys, they were the chiefs of police. Joseph Geruso, he has a son on the city council now. Clarence Geruso, son and nephew, on the prison. But like I say, the same the mentality of Tulane and Broad, criminal sheriffs, criminal coast building. I remember 1953, my father got busted with a joint. A joint, joint weed. He got 10 years. He did 9 years. He stayed 2 years in the parish fighting it. And he did, and you didn't get good time then for the time. You didn't get credit for time served. So he did 9 years and 23 months, came home October the 14th, 1962. That time I was 14. My sister was 13, and his youngest child was right at 9. And he was damaged. He was truly, he was truly damaged, when he came home, because at that time Angola wasn't the bloodiest penitentiary, and it was an honor. You were glorified for killing another inmate. Yeah, you had status. You were respected. I've seen guys came and had problems with guys trying to take their manhood from them, and they'll go to the captain, the lieutenant, and tell them, say, man, the man trying to do me this here. And he say, oh, go get you a knife and go down there and kill him. If you don't kill him, you understand, go down and be his wife. Things like this here, you know what I'm saying? We worked in the field, cutting cane. And we worked from cane to cane, from sun up to sundown. Worked at the sugar mill. I've seen guys get killed at the sugar mill. I worked at the Red Hat. The Red Hat was old death row. That's where they put guys at when they're waiting to die. I just sat in the electric chair. Of course, I was young. When I came there, 65, just the first time. 67 was my second time. And the Vietnam War was flourishing. At the time, I was 17. So I had what they would consider a nonviolent charge. Burglary. Yes, they told me they'd let me out if I go to Vietnam. And I was going to Vietnam. I wanted to go, you understand? Yeah, a couple of us, we wanted to go to Vietnam. What happened, Russia found out that they already said the Vietnam War was a illegal war. Russia found out that they were letting prisoners out of the penitentiary to go. So Lyndon Johnson had to kill that. He killed that, he had to kill that. But let me speak on racism. You understand? You speak on racism. Like I told you, the teachers taught us, well, they didn't have no such thing about woke. They taught us the history of this country. There's racism, and I think racism flourishing again. That's why you have mass incarceration. You understand? Whenever you get a district attorney or city councilman that's going to be progressive, They smear them. They make us, you know, now they make a mockery of us, make a mockery of our women, and they put Donald Trump in office, which speaks volumes. Do you agree or disagree?
I agree.
Yeah, it speaks volumes. You know.
He fuels that fire, that with all of the bigotry and all that.
You know, it's bigotry, and like I said, and I found this out reading about the Civil War, Robert E. Lee, and all of that. I've even had guys try to tell me that Civil War wasn't about racism, wasn't about slavery. But now, this is what I do know: that 20% of all the eligible white men that were living during the Civil War got killed. I mean, so what I'm saying, for that fought for the South, 1 out of every 5 Caucasian was killed during the Civil War fighting for the South. You didn't know that, huh? 1 out of every 5. And when you go to Angola, even you go today, you find out, you hear names like Ajahn, Dubrak, the Cajuns, and they came and they fostered racism, and now we have a recurrence of it.
So then, like, I imagine, well, black people as emulated as they are then as they are now, because now it seems like they love everything black but people. Like you got the girls,
culture, yeah.
They all want to talk like us, dress like us. We're dominating all the sports, music. They kids are influenced by us. They want their bodies enhanced to look
like us.
Could talk to me a little bit about, like, did you think it would get to that point, even though and how weird it is that racism is still around, but they have taken everything from us?
Well, let me say this here. Let me say this here. Like I say, I was educated at George Washington Carver, and I knew, that when God first lifted man up, we became humans in Africa. We know where the first people come from. We come from the first people. You understand? And even during those days, at that time, when they was trying to tell us that our women weren't beautiful, when they put us in ghetto areas like Montague Street, on the City Dome, right across the street from the City Dome, Saratoga, where, he built us in City Dome. We strove and we overcame that bit. But I know I can remember my mother used to work for some white people named the Gordons. And my mother actually ran their household. My grandmother actually ran the Frenches for French people. The Frenches are the people with the mustards, the condiments. You know what I'm saying? She ran it, so they always admired us and emulated us in one way or the other. Now, you understand, they just it's just out and out now. It's just out and out. And I have hope for the younger generation coming along. I don't think racism gonna be what it is when it was in my time. You know what I'm saying? When I was coming up. So.
Do you feel like that, like with Donald Trump and all these new laws and stuff? Do you feel like they're trying to bring it back to that level?
Well, Let's be honest. Let's be honest. You know, all of the social programs that he talking about cutting and taking, they weren't made for us. They were made for them. You know, it's, Social Security and all of that. It's Appalachia. You understand? You know, there's way more of them than us. You know, we are going to survive. You understand? Because that's what we do. You know, we came over the slave boats. You understand? You know, we had Nat Turner. We had one of the greatest slave rebellions in the United States, right here in New Orleans. People don't know about it. You know, Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal, came out of New Orleans. You see what I'm saying? You know, so we as a people are survivors. You understand? And we are the light of the world. We are the light of the world. You know what I'm saying? So I think that it's going to get better. I think Donald Trump is an anomaly. I don't think he's, we're going to destroy the economy, so he's going to destroy the economy, you know, and they're finally going to wake up with him, on him. You know, but racism is a problem. Racism is a problem. You know.